So I'm in the shuttle going to the car rental place in Minneapolis, and I'm there with two women who are talking to each other, sniping with each other a little bit. Turned out to be sisters, no surprise. And they bring me into their conversation, and they let me know that they're there in Minneapolis because they're the third sister in their family, has a long history of mental illness, and she is moving into a facility. They have a fractured relationship with her, but they both felt like it was really important. They were in different states, but it was important for them to show up and be there at this moment. So they asked me what I was doing there. And I said, well, rather tentatively, you may have heard that there is some unrest here in Minneapolis. Oh, yes, we know, it's terrible. I said, well, there was a call. I said, I'm a minister, and there was a call that went out to clergy all over the country this week to come and witness here in Minneapolis. And one of the women's eyes immediately teared up, and her sister said, oh, her husband was a minister. He died 5 years ago, and she said, I know exactly why you're here. So we chatted some more, and they were very supportive, and I appreciated that because I was unsure about being there and what it meant and what I was supposed to do. And as we got to the car rental office and got out of the shuttle, one of them looked at me and said, well, I guess we're both here on a mission. And I thought, yeah, she's right. Just regular human beings who are answering a call of need, coming in love, and not quite sure what we will or won't be able to do in this moment. So I want to tell you, to get started on the Minneapolis experience, there were two things that I noticed right away. The first one is that Minneapolis is cold. I mean, I say that and we laugh, but it is really cold, folks. The other thing that I noticed right away, which I didn't quite realize I was walking into, is that Minneapolis is a city that understands itself as being occupied by the federal government. When you arrive at the airport, you notice people in tactical gear. You notice ICE agents milling around. There is a sense of stress and anxiety in that place that was palpable from the first moment that I arrived. It was noticeable on the streets, noticeable as you're driving by the businesses that are closed because they're frightened to be open. Noticeable as again, in this weather, there are people, lone people, standing out on street corners with signs saying, ICE, go home. Everywhere you go. A city occupied by the federal government. The first day that I was together with clergy, we were called to the Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. We had not been told anything about where we would be meeting, what would be happening. We were just told to come, and we did. So we get the message of where this is going to be. We were told we can't tell anybody. I didn't even tell my husband where we were. We were not allowed to tell anybody until the following day at noon. But we go to this church, and I got to say, I had church envy. Oh my gosh, they have a Westminster Presbyterian, a multi-level parking garage, a children's library. I mean, it was like a hotel lobby. We were all the UU ministers in there were agape. But but we're all called to that space, and there's about 700 clergy that have answered that call. Unitarian Universalists, of course, well represented. but every Christian denomination and rabbis and Muslims and Roman Catholic at my table for breakfast. So many people who have come from so many different religious communities who showed up there in this moment. And I got to tell you, folks, it is encouraging. It is encouraging. We are not alone in doing this work. And sometimes it feels like we are, but we are not. They're out there. So we go into this space together, and the gratitude of the folks in Minneapolis, I can't even tell you. You hear my voice choking because these folks have been holding it together for so long. I mean, not just in this moment, but tracing back to George Floyd and all these other things that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks, but they have been holding it together, and they've been feeling like they're alone there. And the fact that we showed up told them they're not alone, because they know for every clergy who shows up there, there's this many people and then some that are supporting that person being in that space. No one of us was there alone. We were all there because there were communities supporting us and getting us there. And we knew that. So when you talk about 700 people filling that sanctuary, we know how many people that really represents. And there were so many people, they couldn't all even register for our event. They had to have a separate event at the UU Church locally. So there were that many people in town. We think 1,000 or so clergy that came to town. So they're grateful, but Minneapolis also understands what it's going through very well. It knows that it is a testing ground. It knows that if there is not enough resistance there, if this regime succeeds with their plans there, then it's any city next. They know that. They know the stakes are that high, and that is why those folks are out there in that freezing cold weather, outside, resisting through networks of care and community and protests that are truly, truly inspiring. And again, I'll be talking about some of those aspects in coming weeks. But so there we are, and we're in that sanctuary, and one of the things that was said that struck me early on was someone from that Minneapolis community got up and said this administration is copying Nazi tactics, and they are doing that deliberately, and they are not ashamed of that. And that means that we cannot appeal to the other side out of a sense of their sense of compassion or care. That's not going to work in this situation. And they said the bad news is that unorganized resistance does not take down authoritarian regimes. History's proven that. Unorganized resistance doesn't work. But the good news is organized resistance works. History has shown over and over that organized resistance exponentially increases the odds that you will succeed. And that's what's happening there in Minneapolis, what we were part of, true organized resistance that we were connecting into. It is here, folks, in our country, that resistance is happening, it's organized, and we have an opportunity to play a part in that. So what did we do? What happened then? Well, we were involved with some various actions. Some of them you might have heard of. Our clergy, about 100 of them, ended up being arrested at the airport the next day because they were protesting the use of airports for ICE organization, and also taking entire Delta planes and other planes from some other airline companies, filling them with people who had been detained without due process and taking them to other locations. So our clergy, we were told that we had the opportunity to be arrested the next day if we so choose to do that. And that was a dilemma that I was starting to work out, thinking, because Lawrence had said before I left, just come home and don't get arrested. And but what was ultimately determined was, because of the legal process, they asked that only clergy from the Minnesota area would volunteer to do that. And so we were there in support, but we were not the people that were arrested if we were from out of state that day. About 100 clergy, you may have seen them sitting out there, praying and kneeling out there in that cold, and then being arrested to draw attention to what's happening. Another action that I got to be a part of was witnessing out on the streets. They took buses of us out to various locations where ICE has been snatching people from bus stops, from small businesses, just from in front of their homes. And we went out in our clergy garb to observe and be present to what was happening. And it was actually amazing, because I only wear my clerical collar for social justice work, and I had it on, but we're all bundled up in so many things, so the only thing really visible were our stoles. But just being out on the street with our stoles, people were driving by and honking in solidarity. Minneapolis was so happy we were there, and they understood why we were there. Meanwhile, we're walking along, I'm freezing and thinking, what good are we doing here? But the reality was that it was such a beacon for people, that people from other states came and cared enough to be there. So there was a quartet of us, 4 of us that had joined together, somebody that I knew from seminary back in the day, and then we divided into pairs when we were out in the street. So my partner and I were at a bus stop, and the other pair went to a strip mall that was just diagonal from us. And so we stood there at the bus stop, and we talked to some of the people about their experience and what it was like. People actually walking by stopped us and said, they had been out observing as citizens, and they so appreciated that we were there doing the same thing. And we heard all these amazing stories of people in community. When we got back on the bus afterward, we joined with that other pair, and I turned to my friend, Reverend James Galazinski, who I had gone to seminary with, and I said, how did it go? He said, well, I'm still processing what happened. And I said, what happened? He said, well, we were over there in those stores, and it said only one of the stores was open, because most everybody else on this block was afraid to keep their business open at this time. And he said, we went in, we were told, let's try and support the businesses that have stayed open, buy something. So they tried to buy something, and the store owners, who have just been scraping by, said, no, you can't buy. We're just so happy you're here, just take whatever you want. And this happened to everybody on our buses. We're trying to support these businesses, and no one would let us pay. But they're in that store, and 2 vehicles pulled up, each with 6 ICE agents in it, in each vehicle, and those 12 agents came into the store and grabbed a young Asian woman and demanded that she show them her papers. Now, this is the United States, 2026. She ultimately had something on her that satisfied them enough that they did not detain her, but they were back in their vehicles and gone like that. The thing about this that was even more disturbing than what had happened, because I have been witnessing, as though people in the courthouse, immigration watch that we've done here at Tapestry have witnessed, we've seen some of this before, was the fact that this had happened right within our eye line, and we had not even noticed. I mean, that's how this is happening. It's just right out of sight. People are being taken and snatched away before anyone even notices, and it's in your eye line. So James was actually interviewed by CNN the next day about that. But what he said to me on the bus there, and I think he said it later on CNN, he said, he came there as a believer in what he was doing, but when he saw that, he was radicalized. That's what he said. He said, I came out of that experience realizing just how high the stakes are, just what's happening to people, and to see people in our country at this particular moment in time who are having to show their papers in a store, not something he expected to witness. So one of the other things I was involved in was a protest at Target, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But what I want to explain that's really important, that guided my time there, was the idea that any kind of authoritarian regime or fascist regime is held up. It can't exist on its own. It has to have something holding it up. And people describe that in different ways. I'm going to describe it as 4 pillars today, the 4 pillars that hold up an authoritarian regime. It needs these things to be steady and strong. It needs the backing of business. It needs corporations to not be resisting, but to be capitulating to its demands. It needs corporate money, businesses supporting it. It needs that. It needs the media on board. It needs media not pressing back too much. Media just going along with what the administration says. It needs public cooperation. And this is one of the areas that is most potent in terms of what anybody can do. It's resistance often in little ways. It's the people who go ahead and put the paperwork through because it's too much of a hassle not to. The people working in management positions, the people working as school teachers or nurses or doctors who go along with what's set up by the administration when they could be offering just a little bit of resistance here and there. And when we all start doing that, the cracks start to show. It's people being willing to state their truth on social media or to their friends, being able to get out there with what they really believe rather than just wanting to be under the radar. And I know people have safety concerns and so on, that lives are unique and individual, so I honor and respect whatever anybody is able to do or not do. But I think there are a lot of people who could probably lift their voice up a little bit more at this moment in time, and they're just held back maybe by a little bit of fear or concern about how that would be received by people they know. And then the final pillar that holds up a regime is force. Police forces, law enforcement, military, might. I like to think of all of those things, I like to think of it as a table with 4 legs, and once you start knocking one of those legs off the table, 3-legged table, starts to wobble, to not be as steady. You get 2 of those legs out of there, that thing's coming down. So that's what we're trying to chisel away at, those 4 pillars, those 4 table legs. When you're seeing these things on the news about the protests and the actions people are taking, that's what we're working on with that. So that, the next day at Target, there was going to be a protest, and I was part of the organizing team for this, and I knew, so Target headquarters are there in Minneapolis, and they're downtown Minneapolis, and we were going to be doing a protest right there at the headquarters because Target has been giving money to this administration. They've been allowing ICE to use their parking lots to organize, set up their vehicles and all of this. And these are things businesses can say no to, right? They don't have to let ICE use their parking lots. Other businesses have said no. So they've been complicit in a variety of ways. And this conversation's been going on for a while with Target, and it was felt that something greater needed to happen. So we would be doing the protest at the headquarters there, and there would be other simultaneous protests happening throughout the country. So I agreed to be what was known as a de-escalator in this situation. And what I later found out is when you are the de-escalator in one of these situations, you look like the organizer and leader of it. But I didn't know that at the time. So I thought, de-escalator, oh, I'm really good at telling people to take a breath and all that, so I'll do that. Little did I know. So we gathered at this Target headquarters, and there's this very large vestibule. You can go online and see footage of this. Very large vestibule. And there had been a small organizing team, and I didn't know how many people would or wouldn't show up. And hundreds of people, clergy and other people, end up in this space. I mean, it is just packed with people. And there's singing, and there's some people that have been designated to speak, and so on. And it was absolutely just a beautiful, powerful moment. And meanwhile, I'm there, and this executive team from Target has come, nearby along with a security guard. And so I walk over as this is beginning, and I say, hello. I didn't introduce myself by my name, but I said, hello. I said, we're going to be here about 15 or 20 minutes. This is a peaceful protest. And I said, we just want to make sure that Target is aware of our concerns, and I reiterated those again. So these folks did not say a single word to me. And so I stepped away, and I was about 8 feet from them the entire time this is happening. Midway through, at about the 8 or 9 minute mark, I checked in with them again. I said, this will be over in 7 or 8 minutes, and this is, again, we're looking to make sure that Target hears our message today, but it is a peaceful protest. Now, this protest, my job was to make sure that these folks weren't arrested. This was not something that we were trying to get people arrested at. It was something that if these folks had said, we need you to move to another area, you have to leave, whatever it was, we would have left at that moment. But again, they didn't say a single word to me. So finally, this is over. It's been about 20 minutes, and it's been absolutely lovely. The message has been conveyed. People are starting to mill out onto the street. And again, I walk over to these executives, and I say, I thank you for your time and allowing us this platform to share this message today. And I said, our goal was not to make any of the employees here anxious. We just wanted to make sure that those folks making these decisions at the upper levels of Target heard what we have to say. So this executive in the center that has never spoken to me up to this point turns to me and says, well, you've been blocking the fire exits, and now we're going to get into a huge amount of trouble with the city for that. And you're saying that you wanted this to be peaceful. Well, that's anything but peaceful. And he starts ranting. Meanwhile, there is a police officer who has joined this, and she, and I say very calmly, I said, well, I appreciate that. I said it, and I didn't tell them we would have just moved if you'd asked us, I don't want them to know our playbook, right? But it's like all you had to do was say something. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, again, we weren't trying to put anyone out, but we did. If it was a bit disruptive in that sense, that is a good thing, because then the message was heard. And they did not like that. And the police officer shouted some expletives at me and started coming at me, and I was sort of surrounded by this group. And meanwhile, everybody in the vestibule is filing out, and behind me are 2 elevator doors, and I hear one open behind me, and I step back into it and press the close button, and it just... Oh. I have to tell you, too, it could have just been coincidence, but on the way down to the parking garage, the elevator stopped, and all the lights on the panel went off for about 45 seconds, and I just sat in there and I thought, it could have been coincidence, or they could have trapped me in there just to teach me a little bit of a lesson. But anyway, I escaped and was out in the parking lot shortly thereafter. So these things, that's one of these things that helps chip away at these pillars, these table legs we're talking about. And what happened 2 days later? Target's executive finally signed a letter that said, and it's not enough, but it's something, signed a letter saying that the violence had gotten too much and that it needed to de-escalate there. The tactics that were being used to enforce immigration were being too violent. They signed that letter. So after, and I know we're going to go long today, I just couldn't, I couldn't figure out how to contain this, so we'll be a few minutes longer today. But you'll just enjoy your food that much more, right? You'll be that much hungrier. But I go out into the street after this, and remember, all of this has just been planned since the Thursday before, and this is Friday of the following week. I go out into the street, and we're thinking there's 1,000 of us clergy that are there in the city. They've told their congregations there's going to be this march, and there'll be, a good number of people. Folks, they can't even count how many people showed up. It was 50,000 to 100,000 people that were out in the street. Out in the street. People holding signs. And here's the thing, there were people from all walks of life. These people were not all people who voted one particular way. These were people across the political spectrum who have said, enough is enough there in Minneapolis. Across the political spectrum, neither left nor right. And I have it in here. I was going to read you something that was in the Atlantic this week. This is from Gail Beckerman. And he says, dissidence is not revolution. It's not even political opposition. It's something much more elemental. It emerges in environments where power, usually government power, tramples on the basic conditions of life as people know and value them. We know what this means in Minneapolis. People do not like to see their neighbors terrified and rounded up. They don't like to see masked men with guns acting with impunity. They don't like their children being too afraid to go to school. The reaction of regular people in Minneapolis is not fundamentally about an ideological or policy disagreement with the administration. The movement that has arisen on the city's frigid streets is about defending what any reasonable American would call normal, the expectation of a life without the threat of violence or coercion. That's why those folks were out there. They weren't out there because they were all flaming liberals. They were out there because anybody with eyes in that city can see what's going on and that it is wrong. The good news of all of this is that organization is happening. It's that there are communities like the UU community with a history of understanding how to answer these calls. We sent, at least some people say, more ministers to Selma during the civil rights movement than any other denomination. We're certainly up there, however you count it. We had Reverend James Reeb and UU congregant Viola Liuzzo, who both were murdered at Selma for going out there and witnessing. We know how to do this. We have been here before. And this is really our Selma moment. It has the same moral shape, the same opportunity to effect change. And how do we do that? We do that by chipping away at the 4 pillars. And guess what? Everybody in this room has a role in doing that. We have a role. We can chip away at business that's supporting this regime. We can do that by deciding where we spend money, how we spend money. We can do that by speaking out when we see force being misused, by who we accompany and protect at this particular moment in time. We can see that by we can chisel away at those pillars by holding the media accountable, making sure we're getting our news sources from people we can trust. And when we see major news sources capitulating to the current administration, speaking out against them. We can do that each and every one of us by whatever little thing in our own life that we have access to that helps chisel away at these things. The court of public opinion, those of us that maybe could amplify our voices a little bit more at this particular moment can choose to do so. Maybe if you're working for something that supports the administration on some level just make that paperwork take that much longer to get in. Maybe don't sign this or that too quickly. There's a lot of people quietly resisting in that way that are working around the current administration and bureaucracy. Love is not just a feeling. Love is what we do in response to need. You may have seen the Unitarian Universalist Association president, Reverend Sophia Betancourt, get arrested in Washington, D.C. At a protest for trying to protest further funding of ICE. And guess what? The next day, the Senate blocked that bill. You know, these things actually matter. What we do in this moment really, really matters. And each and every one of us has a place. You have a place individually in this resistance, and you have a place collectively. Now, I want to return back to the airport when I left. And as I said, we have 2 more weeks where I will be talking about this, and probably talking too long, but this is important. But I get back to the airport to leave, finally, the day after that murder of Alex Preddy. And I'm there at the airport walking along, and I hear someone call out to me, and I turn, and it's those 2 sisters, I kid you not. I kid you not, from the rental shuttle. We couldn't believe it. They recognized me first. And so they were asking, you know, I'm asking them, how did it go? How did it go? And they said, well, they said it was hard. They said it was messy. And they said they didn't fix everything. And they said they probably would have to come back again. But they said they were glad that they came. They said they felt like they were needed in that moment. And then they asked me how it went for me. And I felt like I could say exactly the same thing back to them. You know, that's what this work is. It is not saving the world in a day or a trip. It's messy, it's hard, it's ongoing. But what is fundamental to it is just the fact that we show up for each other when there is need. For all of us, this moment is a call to respond. It is a moment that is calling us to a mission to stop this. And it is a mission that is shared by every person here, and the more people that we can connect to do this work, the better. And the good news that I bring back to you from Minneapolis is that answering this call, fulfilling this mission, is more attainable than we realized. Don't lose heart, my friends. This is our moment.